Good day to you again, dear travelers, and welcome back to the logbook of a simple Lindworm traveler. As always, I am Krotnip, and in today's edition of Forces of the Northern Tribes, we are going to be taking a break from the bone-crunching violence of the Orc Hunters and the Wise Men, and instead we are going to be focusing on the more subtle parts of the Orcish forces by taking a look at the Evoker. Whereas the previous pieces I've done on said Hunters and the Wise Men have been about pieces that I think do show their colors more or less even in the smaller point games that we have been able to play so far. I would hazard a guess that the Evoker, being a more complex and more situational piece, is going to take some time to show her true colors. But no matter what, let's still try and talk about her and glean some insight into who she is and how she works. So, who is the Evoker? The Evoker is essentially the shaman character of the Orc tribe. They are the sages, advisors, and spellcasters whose wisdom when it comes to the supernatural is highly sought after. They glean some of their knowledge and wisdom from the fact that unlike other orcs, they can remember some of their past lives. As in the setting of Lindworm, the orcs believe that their spirits will be reborn as other creatures, maybe natural occurrences like rock formations, and sometimes as other orcs or maybe varangs. So the evokers are those orcs who can remember some of their past lives and use this knowledge to their advantage. There seems to be a hint in the backstory though that Aalborg can maybe also remember or at least dream of some past life that he has led, but maybe more on that later. The backstory seems to indicate that the amount of evokers within the orcs ranks is on the rise, and this is attributed to the fact that the magic empowering star Warcrow is waxing stronger. Okay, without a further delay, let's then discuss the gameplay aspects of the evoker, since this is going to be taking a while. Starting from the very basic stats, we see that the Evoker is of a middling point cost. She costs more than a unit of Orc Hunters and almost twice as much as the Orc Wise Men. So there is no way that to describe the Evoker as a cheap or particularly easy to include character in your company. You do get a single command token from getting her though, and this can help not only power her own command skill but also the command skills of your other characters, and even helping you potentially win the important initiative role at the beginning of the game. When it comes to movement, the Evoker is quite slow. Her movement of 3-2 is very similar to that of your standard Orc Hunters, while her charge distance is a pitiful 7 stride. The latter shouldn't be too meaningful, since we aren't going to be charging our evokers around all that much. But the 3-2 movement of the evoker can be a bit of a liability, since she's a piece that requires careful placement on the battlefield and developing her position in order for her to be valuable, and thus being limited to just 3 stride, 2 stride moves does hurt. I don't consider the 3-2 movement all that bad for the Orc Hunters, since that is a unit that you're basically going to be pushing forward and then parking at a charge distance from something, and thus threatening a charge. So for those warriors, the charge distance is the way more important part. But as the Evoker is going to be mostly moving and casting spells, this standard movement of 3-2 is going to be a something of a problem. At just 2 wounds, the Evoker is really vulnerable. Her wounds attribute won't allow her to survive attacks any more than a standard Orc Hunter would, so you really have to work hard to keep her safe from enemy attacks. Then again, her psychological performance is excellent with a 2 orange and a yellow willpower, which will in effect give you an average of 2 successes per roll and 3 successes maximum. Moral value of 2 also means that the Evoker can endure stress more than most units, and this is going to come in handy if you want to be activating your Evoker several times during their turn, and also because there are some spellcasting related situations that will see your Evoker endure stress. Only one Evoker is available per company, but I don't see us wanting to run several anyway, because when we combine the relative fragility of the Evoker, her, as we are going to see, quite activation intensive playstyle and the middling cost, I doubt that many people would be interested in taking several invokers in their lists anyway. When it comes to keywords, the Evoker is a character, but she is a character that cannot join any units. This means that you can't hide her inside a unit in order to protect her, and she is not going to be giving any passive benefits to units by simply joining them. This also means that her org label is going to have little importance, since there is not going to be any trouble not being able to join Varank units, since you won't be able to join any units, period. But there might be some spell effects or other things that might be affected by this org label. The fact that she is a spellcaster means that she is going to be affected by certain rules and abilities that only affect spellcasters, but importantly it also means that she can attempt to block spells by the opposing spellcasters. So one reason to bring the Evoker along might be simply to use them in some situations as a passive spell blocking piece. If you can, for example, park the Evoker in, let's say, a forest which blocks line of sight to her, she can remain in quite a safe spot and then project that 20 stride distance of potential spell blocking to complicate enemy spell casting attempts. Blocking a spell with your own spellcaster is such an inexact science, and it's quite unlikely to provide you with the results you're looking for, so you shouldn't think that just including the Evoker and parking her in a nice spot is going to get you covered and no need to worry about enemy spellcasters. But it does introduce more points of failure to your opponent's plans, and it also exacts more of a price for them when they are determining how many resources they need to dedicate into their spellcasting and maybe moving their spellcasters. For example, a situation where they pass their willpower test with a only single success remaining, is still a success, where in a situation where you don't have an evoker to challenge their spellcasting attempt, but the presence of the evoker may force the enemy to take that automatic success and add that to the result, and as a result gain a tinge token for their spellcaster. And in this case, the evoker, whether she attempts to dispel or block the spell or not, and whether she succeeds or not, she's already draining the resources of the enemy by forcing them to accept a tinge token that they would not have otherwise taken. The conquest value of 0 should be of little consequence when it comes to the evoker. She isn't going to be the kind of piece to rush objectives and try and hold them. Theoretically, you can move her back, cap a objective on your side of the table, um, and thus stop an enemy 0 conquest model or unit from taking it from you. But then again, if the enemy is going to be trying to use a 0 conquest unit to take an objective, they must be prepared to wipe out or push away any defenders regardless. And Evoker being only 2 wound model with poor defensive stats, as we are going to see soon, isn't somebody who's going to be able to defend that objective against a determined attack no matter what. If we then proceed to the attack breakdown, as we see, the 3 orange dice are going to be on average providing our evoker with 2 successes, and the maximum amount of successes that you can hope for is 3. So this is I'd argue, decent enough melee attack characteristic for a spellcaster. And if the evoker comes into a close quarter situation with somebody like the Frostfire Herald, or for some reason a lone war surgeon, engaging the enemy in melee might favor the evoker more than trying to start a wizarding duel with the elven spellcaster, for example. But this really isn't what we are going to be getting her for. This isn't something that we are looking to utilize, but just remember that if the situation becomes truly desperate, there is a chance of using her melee attack in some situations. The evoker can't make use of any other symbols beyond successes. There are no switches for her. She does not have a push ability that could make use of her high moral value. So what you see is what you get over here. You can hit a weak enemy model over the head with your staff if you get lucky, maybe if you get a charge off, but that's really not something that we are going to be aiming to do with her regardless. A way more impactful side of her combat performance is her unfortunately weak defensive stats. With just a black dice for a defense and a red dice for a counterattack, the evoker is pitiful when it comes to defending herself. When you combine the fact that her average amount of blocks she will be rolling is just 0.25 per roll, and she only having 2 wounds, the evoker is extremely squishy, and you are going to be losing her like that when something gets to land an attack on her. So keeping the evoker safe, but also keeping her relevant to what's going on the battlefield is going to be a true challenge that the Northern Tribes player has to master. As we are going to see when we go through her spells, I well and truly do believe that the payoff is out there for successfully using her, but positioning a slow moving, extremely fragile model into an important position in the battlefield and having the activations to do so isn't given. So keep a lookout for any chances to advance her safely, like loft blocking terrain such as forests or maybe buildings and walls. Okay, but enough of the fighty stuff. We aren't getting our Evoker so that she can storm enemy held objectives, nor are we getting her for her staff fighting abilities. Let's talk about her spells and how they can be pressed to service of the northern tribes in search of victory. The first spell on the Evoker's card is the Spirit of Thermapleurus. This is effectively an augment spell that you can cast from as far as 20 strides away, targeting a friendly unit. The spell has a 4-turn duration, which means that for effectively the next three activations that the enemy is going to be doing, they will have to contend with the spell's effects. Or indeed, if the initiative works out that way, 4 activations maybe. Take a note that even though the Spirit of Thermapleurus does have the very long range of 20 strides, allowing it to be cast from your backlines and thus hopefully keeping your Evoker quite safe, it does not have the no line of sight characteristic, so you still have to be able to draw a line of sight to your friendly unit that you're targeting, so you can't, for example, be casting this spell from inside a forest or from behind a wall. Then again, the 20 stride distance does mean that you can, in many cases, probably cast this spell from your starting position and then use your second part of your activation to move into a position where you can't be seen. So there's always that. What the Spirit of Thermapleurus does is that it simply grants the Intimidating 1 keyword for the duration of the spell to a friendly unit. What the Intimidating does is that it forces any enemy unit charging the spell's recipient unit or a unit charged by the unit augmented by this spell to pass a willpower test looking for a single success. If they fail this test, then they will suffer an automatic stress token before any attack dice are rolled. So all in all, a decent effect, but not something that's going to be really all that important in most cases, I think. Where things get interesting and potentially very important when it comes to the battlefield situation is with the alterations that the Spirit of Thermapleurus can be taken with or cast with. The first argument forces you to face against a black dice, a single black dice, but what this argument does is that it will break any enemy unit that fails the intimidating check against the recipient unit of the Spirit of Thermapleurus, meaning that an enemy unit charging your unit or being charged by your unit and subsequently fails its intimidating test is going to immediately flee away from your troops. And where I see this ability coming in at its best is when you have a unit securing an objective or another important part of the battlefield that the enemy has to engage your unit to get through you. By casting the Spirit of Thermapleurus on such a defending unit and adding this alteration will make engaging your troops especially risky to your opponent, since if they charge in and fail the resulting willpower check, then their unit will immediately be demoralized and forced to flee. And in this situation, the enemy has just lost an activation in which they have achieved nothing of value to their plan, and at the same time they have lost an important resource in the form of the unit used for at least the next 2 turns, as the unit can't rally until 2 turns have gone by from the time of them breaking from the fight. The second alteration that's available for the Spirit of Thermapleurus is a 2 black dice alteration that's going to upgrade the spell's Intimidating 1 into a Intimidating 2 effect, which means that now the enemy unit is looking for 2 successes in order to pass the test, and they will suffer a point of stress for each success that they end up under this threshold. For example, if a unit is rolling a willpower test against Intimidating 2 and they receive 1 success, that means they will receive a point of stress, and if they receive no successes, they would be resolving or they would be gaining 2 points of stress as a result. If you combine these 2 powerful effects together, you get an Intimidating 2 unit that will automatically break any units that fail the intimidating willpower test imposed by your now truly monstrously frightening orc or varang troops. At this point, I think that this spell also becomes offensively quite potential. Let's say you have an orc unit and you are able to cast the Spirit of Thermapleurus using both of these alterations. Succeeding in such a roll shouldn't be too much of a problem, since the average amount of blocks that you are going to be rolling from 3 black dice is only 0.75, and on an average the evoker should be rolling 2 successes on her willpower, and even if you turn out to get a bit unlucky, you can always just accept a point of tinge to get an automatic success in there and hopefully make sure that the spell passes. Obviously, the black dice do carry also the possibility of gaining tinge tokens or manifesting the tinge that the evoker already has gained during the game, but these I don't think should be too much of a problem, especially early on when there isn't that much tinge involved on your evoker to start with. And if you then are able to cast this spell, if you are able to work the both alterations in, and now let's say your orc unit charges a defending unit of hegemony bulwarks, trying to defend their objective. Before any blow is struck, before the charger's volley ability comes into play or anything, the bulwarks have to pass a willpower test with 2 successes, or they just break and flee away from your orcs, thus giving the objective for you basically without a fight. I won't go as far to say for free, since you have at this point invested quite an amount of resources in taking the evoker and then using the spell, getting it successfully through, and this is no small feat, but if you get there, the payoff can be pretty nice. The said bulwark unit, unless their willpower and their psychological performance is enhanced by an ability like, let's say, inspiring presence or the presence of Dragoslav, they only have, I think, something like 24% chance of passing a intimidating 2 roll on a orange and a yellow dice. So a result that will see your opponent break and flee from you is more than possible. It's rather to be expected. This would also make charging a unit of yours holding an objective that has this double altered Spirit of Thermapleurus active very dangerous indeed. And I would imagine that in the future, as more pieces come out and we get more abilities and more combinations available, this spell in its double altered form can turn out to be an important part of the puzzle of how the orcish forces are going to be taking and holding objectives against their more disciplined enemies. The other spell in the Evoker's arsenal is Summon the Rock. This is a short range attack spell that has the range of 8 strides, and it will be causing on average 2 successes against the enemy's defense, and there is a quite unlikely a maximum damage value of 5 involved in the roll. The damage output from this spell is actually quite modest when it comes to average and expected amounts of successes, and as people who have played several times over the different missions from the Winds from the North starter set, or just playing battles with the starter set miniatures, have probably noticed the summon the rock spell isn't going to reliably take out the Frostfire Herald or inflict meaningful damage on any of the hegemony troops in the starter set, minus maybe a lone war surgeon. But even so, be warned that this spell probably isn't at its best when it's used for its damage potential, but rather there is a secondary crowd control effect available that is going to be more important. Unlike, for example, the Frostfire Herald's attack spell, there is no way to make Summon the Rock more powerful damage-wise. You can't alter it to include, for example, any switches or additional symbols, but what you can do is use a single black dice alteration to increase its range to 14 strides. 14 strides is quite a ways away when things get tough, but you still have to remember that if you have to use your first part of the activation to move within range to cast this 14 range spell, it's more than likely that any enemy worthy of their salt has some type of range attack that they can then next turn leverage against your humble evoker. So move into position to fire the rock at your own peril. The potentially game-altering, even game-winning alteration to summon the rock is a crowd control effect that you gain by accepting the results of 2 black dice into your spellcasting roll. If you successfully cast this version of Summon the Rock, the spell will apply slowed state to the targeted enemy unit when it activates, and this effect will also be enforced upon any enemy unit that activates within 5 strides from the said unit. Remember that this 5 stride distance is always measured from the unit leader, so don't get caught out by thinking that a unit is going to be affected by this and then they're not. There is a system of pre-measurement in use in Warcrow, so there is nothing stopping you from checking what units are going to be affected should you employ this spell. But the fact that this spell effect is causing that slowed state at the beginning of their activations means that it's not a one-time effect that you can simply outlast by, for example, taking that slowed movement or even by resting it away. It's a regenerative effect that comes back over and over and over again as long as you are able to upkeep it with your evoker. The conditions that may cause the evoker to fail upkeep this spell can be found in the rulebook. I'm not going to be going through all of them here as the video is going over the half-hour mark anyway. But the thing is that if you are able to get this heavily altered version of the Summon Rock off, and then you can secure your evoker and stop the enemy from killing her or from getting rid of your spell, then you are in a really good position, because you are now able to cause a regenerative spell effect on an enemy, hopefully important enemy unit, and the unit surrounding them, and this can quickly start to become really backbreaking to the enemy. The place of this spell is probably in a situation where you already have the scoring advantage, you already have the tempo advantage, so you can spare the activation to use Summon the Rock with the heavy alteration and accept the risk of failing at the effort. But if you can pull this off, it can really potentially seal the deal with some games and some enemy army builds. Lastly, the command skill of the Evoker is called Delegate of the Ancestors. It's a command point or command token costing skill that can only target friendly orc units. So here's a situation where the orc keyword comes in, and it's something that you can use to either A, remove a single stress from an orc unit, or B, you can immediately rally a demoralized friendly orc unit that is fleeing. These both can be situationally powerful effects that can allow you to reverse a bad situation by rallying a unit, or de-stressing a unit that the enemy has considered you can no longer activate, and thus that may help you tip the game in your favor. But using this skill does have quite a high opportunity cost, since you have to be activating the Evoker in order to leverage this effect. And if you are already on the back foot, since an important unit of yours has broken and is now fleeing, and then you have to invest the resources into activating your Evoker in order to rally them, then you may find yourself from even further back from your opponent as a result. Then again, if you are able to use Delegate of the Ancestors and then use the rest of the activation from your Evoker to cast either Summon the Rock with the set crowd control affecting alteration, or maybe you can employ Spirit of Thermapleurus to a good effect, then obviously the opportunity cost is much reduced, and what you are effectively facing as the opportunity cost is just more or less the cost of the command token. Okay, it's time for the end analysis. All in all, the Evoker is well and truly a support spellcaster. She by no means is a piece of magical artillery, and you probably should not be fielding her as such. And if you do, there is a extremely high likelihood that she is going to let you down and find yourself wondering what is this, and why is she so bad, while the problem isn't actually the fact that she is bad per se, but rather that she is being employed in a way that's really not her strong suit. The Evoker's abilities instead focus on crowd control effects through both the Spirit of Thermapleurus and the altered, especially the altered version of Summon the Rock, and also the command skill of Delegate of the Ancestors is a way of manipulating friendly morale in difficult situations. If the situation grows desperate from both your and your opponent's side, and you find yourself within 7 strides of a weak enemy unit, it might be worthwhile to charge them in order to try and turn the combat in your favor, but this isn't going to be coming up all that much, I think. Keep in mind that the Evoker's defensive performance is quite abysmal, and this will see Evokers getting killed quite easily if they get attacked, so the burden is on you as the commander of the Northern Tribes forces to keep her secret and keep her safe. I think that it's fair to think of the Evoker, from the knowledge that we have so far, as a really skill-intensive unit that requires a lot of activations to get the best value out of. But at the same time, I think it's also possible to play her as a medium cost soft counter to certain threats. Um, she can make spellcasting more difficult for your enemy by threatening to block spells from 20 strides away. She can be a soft counter to some moral effects thanks to Delegate of the Ancestors. And she can perform the role of a modest ranged attacker with Summon the Rock if the situation calls for that. As of right now, the Northern tribes really don't have any other reliable ways of engaging, or really any ways of engaging enemy units at range. So using the Evoker to project some modest level of ranged threat can help keep the enemy honest so that they don't get too adventurous with their weaker, more defensively susceptible pieces. I feel that in strategy games it's often important not just to stop your opponent from doing something, but impose difficulty on them doing things. And things like imposing that potential block spell attempt, imposing that potential range attack on the weaker units is hopefully going to affect their decision making progress and give you the advantage in the big picture of the game, even though these kinds of soft counters or soft play factors don't at the time seem like the things that are going to win you the game the way that a fully altered Summon the Rock or fully altered Spirit of Thermapleurus can affect the game. So all in all, I think that the Evoker has the ability to win you games in the defensive or in the offensive in some cases, but at the same time, at her high opportunity cost both in points and in activations, she might not be the piece for every list that we will be constructing going forward. Okay, that's it for this more technically complicated and thus a bit longer unit analysis video. Hope to see you soon. So goodbye for now, fellow travelers.